Shana Tova, everybody. Pit Katava. Hope everybody had an inspiring and wonderful Yom Kippur. Today's classes are sponsored for the Bracha and Hatzlacha on occasion of the marriage of Elena Bat Ephraim Mordechai with David ben Lucian, and for the Refuah Shlema and Hatzlacha of Shia ben Sarah Perel, and in memory, or I guess it's Li'ilui Nishmat, Binyamin ben Lev and Miriam bat Chanoch. Thank you. Okay. So, we're continuing with the Alshech HaKadosh. We were in the middle of a piece on the nature of man's connection, his living connection with his soul, which emanates from the Rabbanu Shalom, from the Kisei HaKavod. And we talked about how a human being can have an avatar of flesh and blood down here, and yet be disconnected from that, and yet can reconnect to that. We talked about the nature of Shekhinah, how it's constantly emanating, and yet it manifests in different levels and planes, etc. And this was all to explain a midrash that contrasts the neficha that's characterized in the description of the pasuk of God breathing a soul into man versus the medrash that says that God stood him up as a golem, a lifeless body, from the earth all the way to the rakia, and he threw vizarak, and he threw his soul at him, right? And in order to explain that, we mentioned a fascinating medrash with Rabbi Yossi, how he went to, there's a Gemara that says that he went to be Menachem Avel, he went to console somebody on the death of his son, who over the course of conversation proclaimed that he did not believe in the resuscitation of the dead. And there was a mashal given over there that Rabbi Yossi deftly got the the heretic, to agree that just like a maker makes an earthenware vessel, and it's made out of earth and it's fired in the kiln, but when it shatters, it cannot be put back together again. However, glassware, which over here I guess it's appropriate because you use the breath to fashion the vessel. However, it's made with fire and it's put in a kiln with fire, and that, even if you shatter it to 1,000,000 pieces, you can reconstitute it. So he said that that is the mashal for the body and the soul after death, because the heretic indeed had quoted the pasuk in Tehillim that says that God smashes, meaning the shattering, the enemy when he gets smashed, meaning somebody who expires, their pieces, meaning the separation of the body and the soul can be experienced as a shattering of pieces, akin to a vessel that gets shattered. So anyway, that was a discussion, and the Alshech HaKadosh raised certain questions on that, and we're continuing the discussion now on page 29. We're going to start from the first full paragraph on page 29. Amnam, hine Rabbi Yossi, leman yavo lechalek b'inyan haneficha. In order to contrast this issue of breath, of neficha, as described in the pasuk, Rabbi Yossi raised heir lo ozen b'she'ela hahi. He got the attention of the ear with this question that he posed: Ech laschuchit hana'aseh b'yesod echad yesh takana. How could it be that a glassware vessel that is fashioned with only one element? And I don't understand this, because the whole reason that we're talking about is breath, and yet the element here is or ve'or, meaning fire and fire, as opposed to the earthenware, which is afar and or. So we're going to have to hang in there and see what the Alshech HaKadosh does with this. But, okay, how can it be that only one element is employed in the fashioning of, or rather, it's not that one element is employed, but one element makes up. That's what it is. Even though you're using the element of air to breathe, to fashion the form, and the vessel itself is made out of another element, in contrast, the glassware to the earthenware, the vessel itself, the glassware is made out of one element, whereas the earthenware is made out of two. Okay, so that's the point here. So how could it be that hanasa b'yesod echad yesh takana, it's only made with one element and it can be fixed after it breaks, as opposed to the earthenware pot, which is made out of, its vessel is made out of two elements, and it can't be fixed. You'd think just recombine them, reconstitute them. You would think that it should be the opposite. ויהי לא כן, כי על ידי אמרו החילוק שחילק על הנפיחה, ואמר כי יסוד הרוח אשר בנפיחת האדם, שבא מכוח 4 יסודות שבו, היה לו עזר לקבל תיקון וקיום. So he's saying like this, that since the air, the breath of the maker does not get employed by the earthenware pot the earthenware vessel. And indeed it does by the glass. So that's what's special about the glass. Meaning it's not about the form and what the element is made of, it's the fact that it's made with the element of air. Because when a human being breathes the air into the glassware, the air itself comes from inside him, which is made up of all four elements, all four worlds. And therefore, that conditions the glassware to be able to be rectified. It gives it an extra edge. Somehow inherently it has a little, all of its making has this cosmology on a micro level. So he says that Yesod HaRuach, the element of air, asher b'nefichat Adam, which is in the breath, the exhalation of the human, sheba mikoch arba yesodot sheba, it comes from the quality that he, as a human being, is made up of all four elements. Hayalo ezer, it's an aid, l'kabel, to receive, tikkun v'kiyum, a rectification and a constant establishment. Az heshivlo, and therefore he answered him, meaning Rabbi Yossi answered the min, this glassware that's made with the breath of a human being, so it's certainly, meaning if the glassware that's made with the breath of a human has a takana, then certainly that which was made with b'nefichato shel Kadosh Baruch Hu, a human being who is made with the breath of God, certainly has a tikkun. Okay? So that's how Rabbi Yossi was able to answer. That's the meaning of his answer. Im nefichat ma sheba mikoch adam, then the exhalation does not just provide the movement to form the glassware, but it also infuses the glassware with the some quality, some trait, some faint trace of the maker itself, that which incorporated the maker. Meaning, you understand the metaphor now a little bit better, meaning God is not just breathing into us, but there is some sort of rishimu from Him that becomes ever present in the very existence of the human himself, in his form. So that his mortal form, even after it expires, it has a tikkun. Okay. She'acha histalek hakli, after the vessel already has expired. There's no longer a connection that this kli, this vessel, has with the spirit of the person. The only time that it's actually connected to the neficha is when it's being made, and yet that's enough for even later, after that breath has already stopped. In that moment of time, it's already infused the essence of the vessel. Maspik, it is enough, latet bo tikkun v'kiyum, to give it these qualities. Nefichato shel Kadosh Baruch Hu, the exhalation of the Holy One, blessed be He, shezulati yoto midavar habilti nifsad, that without that, something couldn't even exist. Kihu hamachayet hakol, that's what indeed gives vitality to all. Gam bilti nifseket, it's also never ending. It never stops. Kederch kol davar ruchani, as is the nature of all things spiritual, shemitrabeh umitpashet, that it multiplies and spreads forth, it emanates. Ve'enu nifsak v'ne'atak, and it never stops, it's never interrupted or uprooted. Al achat kama v'kama, even more so. Okay. V'hine, and behold, through these two introductory concepts, asher hinachnu, that we've placed forward, v'hein, and they are, ki hein ha'adam kalul me'arba olamot, a human is comprised of the four worlds, hachomer, his material, me'arba yisodot asher la'olam ha'shafel, is made up of the spiritual elements, right, that ultimately manifest in the physical world, v'hanefesh, and his living soul, mibchinat ha'olam asher al ha'aretz, it's from the world itself that the Aretz exists in, which is the Olam HaGalgalim, which is the celestial bodies. V'haruach, and the spirit, Me'en Olam HaMalachim, it is a trace of the world of the angels. V'Neshama, and his Neshama, his supernal soul, Me'en Ha'elyon, that's the highest world that God is denizen of alone, meaning it's from God Himself. V'aktama shenit. So that's the first introduction. V'aktama shenit, and the second intro, v'hu kilo ne'etaka etzem nivdal hanitan ba'adam imkoro, that it is impossible. The nature of the spiritual connection that man has with his source can never stop. Rak nitraba, it only multiplies v'odenu kashur, and as long as it is tied bimkora, meaning as long as he is tied and connected to his source. Shehu mashal haneficha kim dubar, which is the parable of the exhalation, as we have mentioned. So we have these two ideas here. One is that man himself is comprised of these spiritual qualities that are constantly getting their vitality from their spiritual roots of these worlds, and the fact that the nature of this kind of spiritual connection can never really stop. It all emanates constantly from God as a vital emanation. Okay. Nacha shakta hakushya harishana. So we have settled and quieted our first question, which was, to remind everybody, how can a person be separated, or rather, how can this connection, this soul, be separated from material? V'hu ki lo yatak. It's not really uprooted. Rak yitrabeh v'lo yifasek. It's constantly emanating and multiplying and is not interrupted. Ki chen derech kol makom shesharta bo shechina. That is the nature of any place geographically that the Shechina settled on. Ki gam achrei kein, even after it no longer was there. Nishar shaychut kedusha shama. There's some sort of connection to spirituality that remains there. Kanoda liyodei da'at, like those who are intimate with the secrets. V'hityashvu b'chomer hu, and it settled in that material plane. Kiva b'hadraga rishana b'china kala, because it arrived on the first level in a very light way. Me'en olam hagalgalim, from the world of the galgal. Umatzala manoach ma'al ha'arba yisodot, and it rested on a platform made of the four elements, me'en tuchunatam, or rather a human being who has similarities to them, yashuv olam hagalgalim al arba yisodot olam hashafal, and then the spiritual qualities of the world of the celestial beings settled on the low world of the four elements. V'achar hayot bo ruchaniyut zu zeh. Once it had this level of spirituality resting on it, hayta hachana, there was a preparation and an ability to receive l'kabel mashu hu me'en olam hamalachim, that which was a higher level of spiritual vitality from the world of the angels. Ki inyan hityatzvut ha'olam hahoveh al olam hagalgal. Just as we said that the world of the existence down here is a platform for the world of the celestial beings. V'achar hachana zo, and after this preparation, or this rectification of the world of the angels settling on this structure, hayta nefichato yitbarach, then there was the exhalation of God, Haneshama Ha'elyona, the supernal life force, the soul, Ka'amor, like the Pasuk says. V'zeh yiyeh ma'amar katuv, and that's when the verse states, Vayitzer Hashem, or Havaya Elokim, and Havaya Lashon Rachamim, and Elokim Shem Din came together to fashion. And Vayitzar, the word fashioning, the verb, has two yuds, an extra yud. Shehein shtei yitzirot, because really mentioned in that word is two separate fashionings. Hein shtei tzurot, which includes two forms. Achat bechinat nefesh, one is the forming of a type of nefesh, me'en olam hagalgalim, from the world of the celestial beings. Shenis me'en ruach, and the second is the nefesh, or rather the ruach, the spirit from the olam hamalachim, from the world of angels. Be'elu hashtei tzurot, with these two forms, tzarat adam, he fashioned man, achar heyoto afar min ha'adama, after he was already made a physical form out of the earth. Be'ofen klal bo shloshet olamot, in a way that he includes in him these three worlds. And afterwards, vayifach ba'apav al yado yitbarach nishmat chayim, and through God, blessed be He, there was breathed or exhaled into his nostrils a neshama, a living soul, a nishmat chayim. He ha-neshama elyona, that's the supernal soul. Uleval nitma echi atek miito alaguf, and lest we question, how could it be that this soul should be part from the body? Amar lashon neficha, the verb that was used was right. It characterized it as an exhalation, shiyoreit kashruti mamakar, which underlines the constant or reflects the constant connection to its source. Veheyot mi'ito yitbarach, and it is directly from the Blessed One, shehu bilti nifsak, which never ends, kechol katuv b'akdama, as we have explained extensively in our introduction.
So can we just pause there a second?
Yes.
I understood the first 2 points, which is the fact that Adam was created from 4 worlds, and the fact that there's always a connection.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand what was going on after he stated those 2 principles. What's he saying?
I believe that he's using Rabbi Yossi to explain how this quality of exhalation, or the inclusion of spirit in the creation of something, somehow qualitatively prepares it. It has some sort of constant connection for the rest of the duration of its existence to the qualities of its maker. And we wanted to use that to illustrate the idea that a human being has a constant connection with his soul. And then we came back to explain why specifically then the verb of exhalation is used in the verse. And at the same time, we're talking about that this exhalation is really, it represents the highest form of the spirit that was invested in him, right? When we talk about how he was comprised of all these things. And I think we're going to come back now to the midrash of that he was a golem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Mm-hmm. That's, I think, where we're going with this.
Excuse me, my wife can see the
recording.
Okay. Vishema Tomar. Perhaps you will say, Ki halo ein derech lavo ruach achar nefesh. It's maybe the spirit should not come after the nefesh, velo neshama achar ruach, meaning it shouldn't be in an ascending order from bottom up. Imlo achar avor yamim rabim bein zeh lezeh, without it can't be rather instantaneous. It can't just be you slap one level on top of another, but rather there needs to be several days, maybe in between stages. Meaning a level should be contingent on the level that preceded it, and therefore it should be a function of achievement, and you can't just, meaning it's strange, we experience this as a gradual ascendance in spirituality to the degree that we are worthy. And yet Adam Rishon starts at the inception with these things all pretty much just slapped together, one on top of the other. How could it be, if we experience the nature of such that each one is laying a groundwork for the next one, how could it be that that Adam Rishon initially received all these qualities simultaneously? 2, the Nefesh and the Ruach, ka'achat, as one, as a package deal. L'zeh amar, and therefore the verse is coming to address, Al titma, don't wonder, ki ein Adam Rishon kechol ha'adam. Adam Rishon was not like everybody. You know, my father asked me recently, but this is a question that's come up a bunch of times, if I thought that Adam Rishon had a navel.
That's a good question.
Did Adam Rishon have a belly button?
That's a very good question.
Meaning, we understand a belly button as a result, cause and effect, of a necessary mechanism in terms of gestation. And yet Adam Rishon didn't experience a fetal stage. So the question is the fact that a human being, one of the features on his form is indeed the indention, the impression of an umbilical cord, would Adam Rishon be fashioned that way? Is there significance to that anyway? Mm-hmm. So, so it's fascinating. My father decided that, of course, he did have a tabor. But I think about that now in terms of what the Alshech is raising, because the Alshech is saying, meaning the things that we experience and we take for granted as a result of the nature of, meaning there's a huge difference between the experience of man coming into being and the mature form of Adam Rishon that he experienced life in the first moment from its inception. Okay? And that's what the Alshech HaKadosh wants to underscore over here. That the verse is saying that the fact that we have to achieve a ruach once we've refined our nefesh, and then only then our ruach can be a platform for our neshama. Adam Rishon started off as a full binyan. Ki halo
Can I
hayami.
just say,
Sure.
the Zoom people are finding it difficult to hear.
Okay.
I think there's some technical issues, but if you can
Okay, sure. I'll try
speak
to.
louder.
Okay. Okay. The good news is it is being recorded, Baruch Hashem.
Yeah.
Okay. Lazeh amar, al titma, don't wonder, ki ein adam harishon kechol ha'adam. The first human, Adam harishon, Adam prime, was not like you and me. Ki halo hayami heyoto afar, since he was literally made out of the dust of the earth, muchan, or rather the earth, muchan lekabel kol shefa ukdusha, he was primed to receive all the spiritual influx and holiness, ki yitzir kapav yitbarach haya, because he was literally fashioned, whatever this means literally, but it is literal, he was fashioned from the hands of the Blessed One himself. Umiyad haya ra'oi lekabel neshama, and therefore that primed him immediately to even get a neshama, which is the highest level. Adam Rishon, one of the qualitative differences, we identify him as Yitzir Kapav, the fashioning of God's own hands. I wish I could tell you what it means, but it's just enough to know that that's a truth for me. Anyway, Vizeu Vayihi Ha'adam Nefesh Chaya, the Alshech HaKadosh is telling us what it means. It means that because God was directly involved in a way that he was never involved again, that made the first man specially primed to receive closeness with God. V'zeu, and this is the verse saying, Vayihi ha'adam l'nefesh chaya, and ha'adam was a living soul. Kilomar, as if to say, muchan, prepared, primed, l'kabel nefesh, to receive a nefesh, shehi chaya me'atzma, which lives of itself. Meaning not his regular nefesh, but a nefesh chaya, a nefesh which is always chai, meaning the one that emanates directly from God's existence. He ba'alat chiyut, it is the bearer or the owner of vitality, mitzad atzma, from herself. Mibli yaches el olam me'olamot, without any sort of root connection to any one of the spiritual dimensions, one of the worlds. Hi ha-neshama, that is the neshama itself, chalko yitbarach, the portion from the Blessed One, ubodedet chiyuta, and her vitality is alone, mitzad atzma, from herself. Ki chelek Eloha mimal, it is a portion of God from above, hi yoter mikulan, more than the rest.
Are you suggesting that the neshama is different from the
Absolutely.
glowing of Hashem?
No. We're saying that the neshama is a level of vitality that even though it shares space in terms of its function in man with the other levels of vitality like Nefesh and Ruach, it is qualitatively different because it lives by itself. Remember, it's being emanated constantly from the other side. It's not a world that, it's not a world spirituality, it's a God spirituality. Meaning the other ones they're rooted in the vitality that emanates from that world.
But the problem is that when one passes away,
Yeah.
all those other parts of the neshama also goes up.
The different things happen to them. Different things happen to them. There's different things. There's Hevel Degarmi. There's different levels of the Nefesh that stay here. There's all kinds of things. That's for another time. It is relevant in the discussion of Rabbi Yossi and the heretic. But we're talking, first let's understand the nature of, meaning you're already going to what happens then because of this, but we're saying right. We're saying that the neshama itself is described in the pasuk as a nefesh chaya because it's a nefesh which is chaya herself. It's being emanated from God and has her. She's independent of the other levels, whereas the other levels need to rest on something and they need to receive from something higher.
But also, wasn't there an issue that something else was called Nefesh Chaya? That the animals were called Nefesh Chaya?
Right, so that's a big question. Onkelos addresses this overtly, meaning Nefesh Chaya, until now, just meant a Nefesh, right? Now, the verse is saying there has to be, when this says Nefesh Chaya, it has to mean a different one. It can't be the same as the animals. So then the question is, why does he use those words? It's confusing. And what is this qualitative difference? And Onkelos goes for, he raises the aspect of man's quality over the animals being a speaking being. He uses that as Nefesh Chaya. So over there he says, Ruach Memalala, a articulating mouth. an uttering mouth, which is his. I mean, you can go there. You can talk about how the neshama and vayibach ba'apav and the true expression of man's supernal connection to the neshama is his ability to be like the creator and have creative power of speech. I mean, there's a whole different approach. Meaning they're not mutually exclusive, but meaning he's coming to address this question of yours. Meaning, what's the difference? Why does the verse here? It's clearly saying something qualitatively different because it says vayipach, meaning vatihi lenefesh chaya is a result of the vayipach, which you don't have by the other creatures, and yet so there must be a different nefesh chaya over here. But yes, that's an important point. Okay.
Question?
Yes.
So if man was connected directly to God, you're talking about Adam and Chava, or you're talking about Adam only?
Okay. So 1 second. In this story, you're raising a good point. In the first description of the creation of man, it was one being together. Right? So Chava and Adam, what we call Chava and Adam, is really the first human is male and female, and their masculine and feminine is receiving directly. But in this story, you're asking, hey, the character here, right, our protagonist is Adam, but Adam as masculine. So we actually addressed beforehand that Chava received because she's, meaning however you want to so first of all, the point is like this. Remember, these are two descriptions of the story. We had one story and we finished and we said, Vaye'erev vayevoker yom hashishi, and then we had Vayechulo, and now we're telling the story again, and this is the story where the woman, till she gets named Chava, comes from the tzela, the side of man. This is where the masculine is aware and tries to find a partner and gets acquainted with the animals and doesn't find a partner, and then God puts him to sleep and performs a surgery. So in this telling, right, we're talking about indeed man is receiving all this before. Chava's not even here. It's not like he got it and she didn't. She's not even in the story yet. So obviously when she's made from him, she will have these qualities. But right now, the story is as if there is a masculine, primal expression of humanity without a separation and a discrete entity of femininity. Okay? Well, ultimately, we're going to have to put the two stories together. That's even a later limud. But the point is that I believe your question is, how come man gets all these great things? What about the woman? And I'm saying that's not what's happening here, meaning there is no woman. Right now there is human, and humans being fashioned this way. And ultimately, woman as a separate identity is going to be, what's the word when an organism individuates? She's going to emerge from man and leave man as a man, the way we know it, masculine. And then hopefully they're going to get together if they have shalom bayit, if there's no snake in the way. Okay, so hefech shar b'nei Adam. So these are all qualities that were unique to Adam Harishon that you and I do not share. When it comes to our attaining our supernal neshama, that's only if we're worthy in this world and we've refined ourselves and we're able to be a merkava for that soul. Adam Rishon started his life, he opened his eyes with that supernal connection. V'hu shimush halamed, and that's the use of the lamed when it says lin nefesh chaya. He could have said vatihi nefesh chaya. He was a living soul. Vatihi lin nefesh chaya means that he became something because of a quality that was a nefesh chaya. It's not that he was the nefesh chaya, but rather he became who he is because of his association with a nefesh that was vitality of herself, meaning his neshama. Muchan lenefesh shehi chaya, he was prepared for a nefesh chaya. Okay. V'zenyan hama'ama, and this is the point of the verse vayipach ba'apav, that he breathed up his nostrils. Milamed shehemidu golam. You just said that God exhaled into his nose, and yet the Medrash says that he stood up his golemic form. Is that a word? Golemic. Right. He stood up a lifeless earthen form of man from the earth to the rakia and hurled the neshama at him, in the words of the Midrash, right? Vehu, ki hukshalo, the Midrash was troubled. Ki acha amro vayitzer, it says that God fashioned with an extra yud, shiyore alatzura, which is talking about the form itself. Ech yomar acha kach vayipach, how can it say afterwards that he breathed? I'm not sure what the question is. Ve'od, shahayalo lomar, that it should have said, vayas, that he made. Im chozer ala chomer, if it's referring to the verb used to fashion the actual physical matter. Alkein Amar, therefore, the Midrash states, Milamed shehemido Golem. It teaches us that God stood him up in his golemic form. Vehu, and that is she'achar yoto golem, after he was already made but still incomplete without his essential life force. Ha'amido, he stood him up. What does that mean? He stood him. Shehu ki natan bo ha'amada shahaya nitzav. He gave him a way to stand, a way to be upright and firm. Ki ein zerak ayidei tet bo ruach chayim la'amod. This just means, this is referring to giving him a ruach chayim, a spirit of life, so that he could stand. You know, like the other creatures that are alive, they also stand.
But he needed the Neshama to do that?
No, this is before the Neshama. When it says that he stood him up as a golem, right, that means that he had physical matter, his body, and then he stood him up. What does it mean? He gave him the lower levels of vitality, up to the rakia.
The lower levels being the Nefesh and the Ruach, but not the Neshama.
Right. Ach lo haya haruach chayim neshama me'olam haneshamot asher lemala me'arakia. Meaning, let's look at the words and understand them poetically in terms of the concepts that we've discussed. Okay? So I'm going a little bit ahead here. Just we'll read in the words in a second. But something to the effect of the following. Right? God took a golem, meaning he made a lifeless form out of the olam hashafa, the physical body which was comprised of the 4 yesodot. And then he stood him up to the rakia. What does it mean he stood him up to the rakia? He gave him the lower levels of life that correspond to the worlds up to the rakia, right? Which gave him a standing along those worlds, a shir koma that correspond to those worlds. But then he hurled to him his neshama. And we have to explain the verb hurling here, okay? But that's where we're going, okay? So the words of the Midrash, it doesn't mean that he took a golem and he stood him up and his height was astronomical, and then he threw in his life vitality. And it's describing the process, indeed, that we have been talking about, okay? Right? And he gave him everything until the neshama, which is lemala meharakia, where its domain is above the firmament. Rak ad harakia, only until the firmament. Ki hayta ha'amada ad harakia bilvad, because his spiritual standing, which gave him life force, right, was only from the rakia and below. V'yiyeh harakia ha'amor b'yom sheni, and this is referring to the rakia that we mentioned in the second day. Vayas Elokim et harakia, which refers to hu olam hamelachim. So, meaning that he got his nefesh and his ruach. Kimamar Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, like it says in the chapters of Rabbi Eliezer, Shuhu Harakia She'al Rashei HaChayot. This is not talking about the firmament between, that we would take for granted that the mazalot are in, or which it gets confusing because that could be the galgalim. This is talking about the firmament in Rabbi Eliezer's description, which is above the chayot, the holy chayot HaKodesh, right? Which is the olam hamlachim. Ve'amar she'ad sham hayta amada v'chiyut, until the level, including the level of the malachim, he had a standing and a life force, shekol el chiyut, that was a general, it included in it a life force, mityaches el olam ha'galgalim, which corresponded to the world of the celestial beings, ve'el olam ha'malachim, and to the world of the angels, shehein hashtei yitzirot, those are the two fashionings referred to in Vayitzar with 2 yuds. Shekatavnu al milat Vayitzar. Ve'achar kach zarak bo neshama, and afterwards God hurled his neshama, me'ito yitbarach, from within him, he hashlishit, that's the 3rd level, v'zeo amro zarak, he threw it, kizorek mimenu ve'elav, like somebody who throws from himself, from his domain, to another. Velo kimishalshal nishmat atzilut, and not like an emanation from the world of atzilut, derech ha'olamot, through the worlds. Meaning, it didn't go, it wasn't mediated through a emanation. It was directly on its own correspondence between God and man. That was the exchange. That's what it, meaning it wants to qualify the neshama and separate it from the other levels that are emanated and mediated through each other. Okay? Ki achar hegiu ad harakia, because after he had arrived till the firmament, hu sha'al rashei hachayot, which is above the heads of the holy living forces in the Merkava, Kim Dubar, which has been mentioned, Ein beintayim olamot l'shalshel elav. There is no sort of interface to allow within the worlds to emanate to him. Rak hizorik ba'avir mimenu yitbarach neshama l'ruach. It's just like God throwing into the air from himself the neshama onto to the ruach. Shehi merkava neshama, which is the vehicle and the home, the domicile for the receiver, for the neshama. Kizorik mash biyado lazulat, like somebody throws something in his hand to another person. So the fact that we said zorik just means it talks about the relationship of the level of the neshama with the other levels of vitality that man has, but it doesn't mean to contrast it to vayipach. Remember, if you include the verb of the verse, we know that it's not, God didn't separate the neshama from himself and now it's in Adam's domain, but rather it's a constant flow and direct connection on that level, independent of the other levels of vitality that man receives. How are we
Although
doing?
the idea of throwing is that once you throw it, it's left the domain that it came from.
Right, so we don't want to say that in the mashal. That's what I'm saying. That we jump back onto vayipach. The only reason why we're using zorek over here means it's not that the neshama is not constantly emanated and still in the domain of God in a living connection, but rather it wasn't placed on top of the ruach directly and then emanated down to man through a structure, but rather it has its own connection between man and God.
Yes,
Your free meeting has ended.
yeah, we have to.
Okay.
That's a reminder for us to go to the next meeting.
Okay, good. Okay, so on the recording we'll say, see you next time.
Yes.
Fit Katava, Chag Sameach.
Yeah.